Okay, so first let's introduce ourselves. Ahmed Belkhodja, next to me, who is the co-founder of Fala, a practice based in Porto since 2013. And with Ana Luisa and Philippe, they mainly work on housing and mainly work on transformations. And we could say that their universe is tinted by bold patterns, playful materiality, and complex geometries. And I'm Camille Bagnoud, founder of Cosi Studio, practice based in Lausanne since 2018. And I also work mainly on transformations, and I try to tend to make projects that are communicative, joyful, and inclusive. And Fala is teaching here at Head since 2018. And I joined the team 1 year later, first as an assistant in 2019. And we both teach in bachelor or master, depends on the semester. And we worked on fictive exercises or on mandates, depend also on the semesters. We usually tackle the semester with the angle of the confrontation with the real life conditions, and usually what we interest the most in the way we work are the drawings, but mainly the models and the detailing to really confront ourselves to the reality of the field. And today we are here to present you the project of Playing Field, which is a project made in 2022 by the first year students during the spring semester and also during a workshop at the end of the summer, which led to a built scenography outside just in the park in front of the school. The project was a collaboration between Journée du Patrimoine and Head to commemorate the old stadium of the Charmille, and it was demolished in 2012, so 10 years before the event, and it was standing in front of the school in the huge park you have right in front of the main entrance here. And the brief was to imagine a scenography to host many events during a weekend. And for that, we had many departments of the school involved into the project. So first, a movie was made by the cinema department. Then the fashion department did a catwalk and imagined a few football shirts with the people from the neighbor. The visual communication department did a special Panini album for the event to commemorate the Servette FC team, but also the stadium. And finally, we did our department imagined the scenography to host all those events, plus the football tournament. So that's the project in a few words, and the title of the presentation of today is La Paracritique in French, which refers actually first on everything, on all the elements which are related to a text but not into the text, so everything which is floating around the text like the footnotes and so on. But also in French it's a reference to the kind of ornamental character that the project had when it was built. And for today's presentation, but also for the text, we wanted to discard all the images to talk about the project, all the photographs, all the drawings, everything which is usually used to present a project. And we chose this image of an eclipse to show, you could imagine it's a bit like when an astronomer would like to understand what is happening during an eclipse, he cannot really observe what is happening, but only the emanation of it, which means everything which is around the main element, but not the element itself directly. And it's also it's a bit the same thing we are doing today during for the presentation, and for the symposium we are talking about a topic without actually mentioning it during the entire day. So it's the continuity of this reflection we want to do today. And so today we want to explain that project without the images and representation, as we said, and by using only the commentaries and the testimonies of all the actors involved in the project, and also all the media who covered actually the event before the weekend and during the weekend. So through those sources, we want to experiment the way to present this project. And we want to push a bit further actually the exercise and the experimentation by asking you, all of you, each one of you, to be contributors for to produce imaginary representation of the project. Some of you already know the project, some of you not at all, but the exercise remains the same for everybody. So the idea is that we will give you a piece of paper and a pen if you don't have one, and you will draw what you think the project is during the presentation, only by the description you will have. And the idea is that you could do a detail, an atmosphere, a plan, a fragment, an overview, everything what comes through your mind. And at the end of the presentation, we will collect the drawings and see what will emerge from this experimentation. Yeah.
So basically, the question is a bit to discard the image and to try to understand some sort of emergence that happened through what surrounds it, as Camille mentioned. So in a way, your ignorance will be a fuel, and so we are, let's say, very interested in the misinterpretations that could occur. So no cheating, and if you know the project, I mean, do still according to your memory. But what we will do is that we will show a few references around a few key topics of the project. So things that have been mostly discussed in the atelier, but also always starting from quotation of people that commented on the project. It will get a bit clearer when I go through it. So the first topic is what we call the immaterial heritage and sausage stands. Here, Laurent Favre from Le Temps wrote about Playing Field. Ce patrimoine immatériel ressurgira donc durant 3 jours. Dès vendredi, des étudiants vont installer à l'entrée du parc une scénographie composée de 9 pavillons, inspirée des différents espaces fonctionnels de l'ancien stade. So, as he mentions, basically, there is a very strong and important relationship in the project between what could be called the immaterial heritage through the involvement of the Journée du Patrimoine. In this case, specifically, the absence of the stadium, which used to be where the park is today. And the main goal of the project was to bring back certain memories. So in a sense, to make it exist once again, but not in a really material manner. In a way, one of the very important inquiries into such a topic in recent history has been this exhibition in Centre Pompidou in Paris in 1985 by philosopher Jean-François Lyotard and design theorist Thierry Chaput called Les Immatériaux, which was exploring the relationship between matter and thoughts. And these thoughts, of course, include memories, history, and that, let's say, it led to many very interesting ideas that were influential at the time. For example, the temps différé, which, according to them, means that several times could happen at the same, in parallel, rather than in sequence. And effectively, in Playing Field, the stadium of the 90s, 2000s existed here in 2022 for a few days, one could say. Another example is Robert Venturi and Donny Scott Brown in Philadelphia with this Franklin Court, which aims to, let's say, materialize somehow the absence of Benjamin Franklin's former house. So it's a project that deals in a similar manner with history and absence, immaterial heritage. In a similar, let's say a few years later, Toyo Ito conceived a house here called the house in Hanako-Gane, which is actually a very interesting house based on a climatic experiment. There is a winter room and a summer room with very different climatic conditions. This is basically the base of the project. If you want, it's a bit like a Lacaton and Vassal in color. But in relationship to our topic, what we found interesting is that he presents the project through this weird text called Adèle's Dream, where he writes a story about some designer from the 1920s in Paris called Adèle, and that supposedly this project from the 1980s in Tokyo is inspired by her sketches. Actually, this is all, as Yuri would say, a postmodern pastiche or game, because that designer never existed. But in a way, it is a manner to summon memories and a certain history in a project, and to try to make sense of them in the contemporary world. The second topic is what we call the crowd of objects. Jeanne Hérichet, one of the students, quoted in an interview in the Léman Bleu, says, il y a plusieurs parties différentes, il y a 2 goals qui sont prévus pour organiser un tournoi, ensuite il y a un automate qui prévoit tout le planning de l'événement, etc. Et il y a des gradins derrière moi qui accueilleront différentes activités, différentes fonctions durant le week-end. So effectively, the project was fragmented, made of different parts, as she mentions. In a way, this is a very constant theme through the history of our discipline. For example, Frank Gehry in the 1970s, if I recall correctly. Quite famous as well, Nishizawa in Tokyo, in which here the house is fragmented into different volumes, totally autonomous from each other. And of course, this finds its root in his partner Sejima's work, which also are about fragmented elements seemingly floating in space, and them together functioning as a project. And so, in a way, this relationship to the relationship to scale that this kind of strategy puts in place, we found very interesting, and is very important to the playing field project. In a sense, this is a way to make a house not an imposing thing, but a lot of small, cute things. In a certain manner, when both of them, Sejima and Nishizawa, did work for a temporary pavilion in London, they played as well with that kind of cuteness, with scale, making a building that sometimes seems to be at the scale of a child. And in a way, this playfulness, this relationship to cuteness was important in playing field. In a sense, making something cute is making sure that, or trying to bring up certain affective relationship to the project. And that was one of the important aspects of playing field. Another one is what we call crumbling standards. As Camille mentioned, playing field was somehow trying to evoke a stadium. So there was a football field for competition that happened during the weekend, but that football field was distorted. As Gijs Bachs from Space Encounters says, when the project got an award in the Frame Award a few months later, reinventing space by distorting the outlines. That's the full extent of his quotation, actually. So it was a very important aspect of the project that somehow it took known things, distorted them. This is something that, of course, exists also in the history of art. Erwin Wurm, for example, in the 2000s builds what he calls the narrow house, which is a standard house just squeezed in order to become narrow, which of course is a comment on wealth and commodity today. And he writes a couple of years before a text called I Am a House, Am I a House? In which he talks in the name of the house, saying, am I an artwork? I am a house, yes, but if someone would want to buy me, what would they get? A house and an artwork? Just a house? Or a double house? That means me, the house, and the art piece house, or no artwork, just a house, or no house, just an artwork? Oh, that's confusing. Indeed, the distortion brings a certain kind of confusion. It is about trying to provoke a fresh experience of something we all know, and that's what the project did with the football field. A few years before, Rem Koolhaas, for instance, and OMA in Milano, in the Milano Triennale, made a pavilion that is based on this house, extremely famous, that you all know, I assume, by Mies van der Rohe in Chicago, the Farnsworth House, and distorted it to fit in the building of the Milano Triennale. And so here as well, it's about distorting, but also in this case, let's say, trying to make it softer to a certain extent. A few years earlier, Itsuko Hasegawa was experimenting with houses in Japan, and she suggested that to, let's say, break the normal hierarchies and ways of living of a house, one could play with distances. So she tries basically to make the longest distance possible within a house. So she tries with different manner. And in the end, she decides to make a living room that is this quarter circle so that two people could be as far away as each other as possible. So it looked like this in the end. Another example of a crumbling form, to go fast. Kazuo Shinohara in Tokyo builds this house, which takes a lot of modernist tropes, the ribbon window, etc. But here, what makes the house special is the fact that it is under high voltage lines, and therefore there are cylindrical forms that need to be subtracted from the house. And so it takes this weird form, as if the building was being crushed by the weight of that immaterial thing above it. So this is the last floor bedroom with that odd shape pushing on you. Another theme that was important was the fact that the project was meant to be entirely recyclable, so it was made of things that could be reused. Samar Younes of Samar Ritual says, an innovative balance between utility and nostalgia. The project's multifunctional installations built with reusable materials not only breathed life into the park, but also minimized environmental footprint, a commendable achievement. Overall, this endeavor is an effective, sustainable blend of past and present, catalyzing community interaction while preserving the collective memory of a landmark. So a lot of buzzwords. But essentially the relationship to time, the fact that the project had to exist for a few years without being wasteful was extremely important. And so it was made of scaffolding elements, like they were used in the Teatro Officina by Lina Bobardi, for instance, and a lot of object scale, a lot of objects that people could then take with them when the event was finished. So that was, in a sense, what it was made of. How are we time-wise? Let's say what I want, this is what is called the Poème Symphonique by Ligeti, who is a Hungarian composer. Of course, in music, the idea of a finite time is essential and much more important than in our discipline. But here, what is very interesting, we thought, is that this is a piece in which you have 100 metronomes, so mechanical metronomes, that are launched at different rhythms at the same time through a quite complex mechanism. And the piece is just about how this white noise of all the tic-tacs gradually disappears until you have only a few of them with, let's say, competing rhythms, and in the end, the sound disappearing gradually. But my point here is simply that, let's say, all pieces of music are set for a certain amount of time, but when you start composing with this as the first basis of your thoughts, you arrive somewhere else. And this is something that we have experimented in other projects, including outside of the school. This is a project for a music festival in Belgium that we, Fala, did a few years ago, which was meant from the very start to be dismounted so that it could be reused by other architects, other practitioners. And so a couple of years later, it was disassembled and it became this other stage, in which keeps on traces of this one in a certain manner. And the last topic we wanted to mention was margins and passageways, as we called it, referring to that quotation by Claudio Fiore Massens. I really like the passageways made by the lights planted into the ground. Wonderful. The event looked very accessible and diversity. I think he meant diverse. May I even say queer with the attendees. I think the way the field was designed is memorable and an innovative way of homage to the old and adding to the new. Essentially, what we found, was very important for the project is also that, to a certain manner, it is accessible, welcoming to to the most various audience. And this was also an important aspect of this project, which was about bringing for the first time a music festival within what used to be a military compound, which it was disaffected. And so the question of how does one mark the presence of what is normally marginalized, the, let's say, underground music scenes and so on, was very important. The question of the stripes was part of it, because stripes historically are also usually what marks what is on the margins. And of course, at night, all these games find a totally different existence. In another theme, also playing with, let's say, commonly marginalized actors, Cosi Studio has made several projects in which the main focus seems to not be human beings, but other kinds of inhabitants. This is a duck motel, and this was bathroom for two Sphinx cats, right? Basically, the question is, when one does design from that starting point, where does this design land? And this is something that exists in other projects. For example, here, a house for a person and their pony in Japan by Atelier Bauau. But maybe just to close on that topic, we were interested in Itsuko Hasegawa once again in the mid-80s, when she started doing her first big public projects. This is a school. As you can see, the school is in the middle of an old neighborhood with smaller buildings. And so what she decides from the very beginning is that even though this is a big building, it needs to be fragmented, made of smaller elements that seem to relate to the other buildings around. And she decides also that it would not be organized functionally, but rather through different sizes of rooms, so that the different inhabitants could define themselves what could happen in them. In a way, in her mind, this is a way to include as much as possible the free will of the inhabitants. And this is also the moment when she starts publishing such projects with nighttime photographs and these computer images, which give an emphasis on the fragmentation of the different elements, which was also important in playing field. And she writes, architecture has traditionally excluded women, children, inexperienced youth, and those with unique narratives, considering them socially minor. However, it is clear that these minor, entre guillemets, individuals support the diverse genesis of architectural structures. The ongoing minorization of architecture means that it is moving in the direction of the feminine. So this is her writing in 1984. In a way, playing field was also functioning with that idea that a football stadium is not necessarily for the normal standardized body. And in a sense, what we want to put into focus here is the relationship between this inclusivity and a certain approach to form, because the fragmentation seems to be very linked to that. And in a sense, the ultimate question is what, let's say, is a column still a column when it is within a trunk of wood, or does it need a certain field of play, of interactions to exist as such, or is it a column only in the eye of the person that looks at this, And that's a bit where we will end. But the point is simply to stir the imagination of your drawings. So thank you.